Welcome back to Self-Invested. My name's Lemuel, and in this video we're going to be comparing stocks and share ISAs to SIPPs. Now, I'm not going to go into much detail about what a SIPP is and what a stocks and shares ISA is, because I've already made videos on those topics. Now, if you want to watch those videos, have a look in the description to this video to see links to my videos on those subjects. Now, if I've done a video on what a stocks and share ISA is and what a SIPP is, why am I making this video to compare them? Well, the reason I'm making a video to compare them is because I think there are certain aspects of a SIPP that I don't think people fully appreciate, and I don't think people fully understand how a SIPP works in comparison to a stocks and shares ISA. I think they hear the word pension and in SIPP, self-invested personal pension, and quickly they just tune out and they don't listen anymore. The stocks and share ISA, however, it says stocks and shares, so it's a bit sexier and a bit more interesting to people. But I think there are certain aspects which I'm going to cover in this video which could mean that a SIPP is better suited to your financial goals and your circumstances than a stocks and share ISA. Now, let's just start by discussing the similarities between a stocks and share ISA and a SIPP. So a stocks and shares ISA and a SIPP are similar in that they both protect your investments and your money within them from tax. So they protect your investments and your money from income tax, so any dividends you get, any interest on cash within these accounts are protected from income tax. Also, any capital growth, so that's the growth in the value of your assets or your investments within these accounts, is also protected from capital gains tax. Another similarity between the two accounts is that you can invest them in the same thing. So you can invest them to buy stocks of Tesla or of Apple or Google, or shares, of Apple, Google and Tesla. You can also use them to buy funds, which are made up of different shares or combination of shares and bonds, or different types of investments. You can also use them to buy bonds. So now we looked at the similarities. Now let's consider the differences. So I'm just going to put up a table on the screen and compare them side by side. Now the first difference I want to compare is the difference with tax relief. Now with an ISA, a stocks and shares ISA, if you put £100 into that account, that's all the money that gets added to the account. There's no additional tax relief that you get from the government. With a SIPP, however, you get tax relief at your income tax rate. For example, if you were a basic rate taxpayer and you put £80 into the account, you would get a tax relief of £20 in addition to your £80, giving you a total contribution in that account of £100. Now, if you're a higher rate taxpayer, so that means you get taxed at 40%, then this benefit's even more generous. If you put £60 into the SIPP, then you would get £40 in addition to that £60, taking your total contribution in the SIPP to £100. Now, another difference around tax between an ISA and a SIPP is that when you're taking money out of an ISA, there's no tax to pay at all. With a SIPP, however, you'd be able to take about 25% tax-free, but the remaining 75% you take out would be subject to income tax. Now, another difference between an ISA and a SIPP is that with an ISA, you have a £20,000 a year limit on what you can put into it. With a SIPP, depending on how much you earn, you can put up to £40,000 a year. Also, you can carry forward any allowance that you haven't used from previous years. So say you had £20,000 of unused allowance from last year, you'd be able to make use of that this year. So in addition to your 40k allowance, you'll be able to make use of that 20k allowance meaning that you could put in up to 60k in your SIPP. With an ISA, however, you can't carry forward any allowance from a previous year. Now, the third difference between an ISA and a SIPP is around accessibility. Now, with an ISA, it's very easy to access your money in it. You can do it anytime you want, and there aren't any real restrictions around age. With a SIPP, however, currently you have to be 55 in order to access your SIPP, and in 2028 that age is going to increase to 57, and there's nothing to say that later on in years to come that age may actually get higher. The final difference I want to cover between an ISA and a SIPP is with regard to death. With an ISA, when you die, it's considered part of your death estate. So that means that it's subject to inheritance tax. But if you have a spouse or a civil partner, your ISA could be passed on to them tax-free. But if your ISA was to go to anyone else other than your spouse or your civil partner, then your ISA would be subject to inheritance tax. With a SIPP, however, a SIPP is not considered part of your death estate. And if you were to die before the age of 75, it would be passed on to your beneficiaries, whether it's your spouse or your children, tax-free. If you were to die after the age of 75, then your SIPP would be passed on to your beneficiaries at their income tax rate. It wouldn't be subject to inheritance because it's not part of your death estate. Now, as you can see from that table, you can start to get a sense of how a SIPP may be more beneficial for you in certain situations, and stocks and shares ISA could be beneficial to you in other situations. But I just want to sort of give a practical example of how sort of an investment will perform with a SIPP and with an ISA, just to sort of illustrate the difference a bit more clearly. Let's say there was a person A who had an ISA and invested £100 into their ISA. They would have a total contribution in the ISA of £100. If we had a person B, who was a basic rate taxpayer, and they decided to pay £100 into their SIPP, they would pay in £100 and they would get a tax relief of £25, taking their total contribution in their SIPP to £125. Now, say we had person C, who was a higher rate taxpayer. Say they decided to put £100 into their SIPP, they would get tax relief of £66.67, taking their total contribution in the SIPP to £166.67. Now, say they all put their investments into the same fund or the same investment over 20 years, which gave an annual return or interest rate of 4%. Person A, the ISA person that put in £100, their investment would have grown to £219.11. Person B, who put their money in a SIPP and were a basic rate taxpayer, their £125 would have grown to £273.89, and the higher rate taxpayer, person C, their investment would have grown to £365.10. Straight away you can see with person B and person C, their investment has grown more than person A because of the power of compound interest. Although it's only a small amount to begin with, that difference between the three of them has got larger as time's gone on with the power of compound interest. So let's see how much each person is left with after tax. Now, with person A that put their money into an ISA, their investment would have grown to £219.11. They'd be able to take out that full amount without being taxed anything, because it was in an ISA and it is exempt from any sort of additional tax. Now, with person B, their investment would have grown to £273.89, and they would be able to take 25% of that tax-free, which is £68.47, but £205.42 would be subject to income tax. Now, if person C was still a basic rate taxpayer, that means their income tax would be £41.08, which is 20% of the £205.42. This would leave them with a total amount withdrawn of £232.81. Now, this is around 6% more than person A. Straight away, you can see, even though the amount that they've withdrawn has been taxed, they still end up with more than person A. Now, with person C, who's a higher rate taxpayer, their investment would have grown to £365.10. Now, they would be able to take out 25% of this tax-free, so that's £91.30, and the remaining £273.89 would be subject to tax. Now, if person C was still a higher rate taxpayer, this means that that amount would be taxed at 40%, which is quite a large amount. Now, that would mean £109.55, but would still leave them with a total amount withdrawn of £255.64, which is over 16% more than person A, who invested their money with an ISA. So there you can clearly see the benefits of investing your money with a SIPP. Because of the tax relief that you get even as a basic rate taxpayer, your investment's going to be able to grow a lot more, because there's more money going in, and with the power of compound interest, it'll be able to outgrow your investment in an ISA. Even if you're a higher rate taxpayer at the time you're withdrawing your investment, because of the benefit of compound interest on that initial tax relief, you're still going to benefit more than if you put that money into an ISA. If you were a higher rate taxpayer when you paid in that money, but when it came to sort of withdrawing that money, you were then a basic rate taxpayer, say because you retired, then the amount that is actually taxed would actually be lower than in that example, and you'll be able to actually keep more of your investment. This actually just shows a worst case scenario, or a scenario in which you are actually in the same tax bracket as you were when you put in that initial investment. Now, to summarize, I don't think it's either or with a SIPP or an ISA. Both have their purposes. If you're a younger person, then an ISA, and you plan to retire early, an ISA might be better for you, because your financial goals would be to use your investment a lot earlier than the age at which you'd be able to access it. So if you're in your 20s and you plan to retire, I don't know, if you're 20 and you plan to retire when you're 45, that means you're investing for 25 years. But you wouldn't be able to access your money at 45 if you invested it in a SIPP. However, if you're 40 years old and you're putting your money away for 20 years, then a SIPP may be better suited to your financial goals, because by the time you need to access the money, you'd actually be old enough to access your SIPP, and you'd be able to get the added benefit of the tax relief on the money that you put in. So the last thing I want to say about a SIPP is that the tax relief benefit for higher rate taxpayers is very generous. Because it's so generous, there are people that think it should be changed. So that pressure may actually force the government into actually changing how they look at the tax relief for high rate taxpayers. So that's something to bear in mind. I can't imagine that they'll change things retrospectively. So if you are a higher rate taxpayer, then it probably makes sense for you to make use of it now, because there is a chance in the future that is less generous. So that brings us to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy the video, please remember to like it. And if you enjoy the content that I make on this channel, please subscribe. And if you have any comments or you have any questions, then please comment down in the comments, and all of those things help the channel. Any engagement, any sort of interaction between the people watching, the audience, and myself, the channel, actually helps the channel grow. It gives YouTube the sense that what I am producing, the content I'm putting out there, is actually of interest to people and is something that people want. So yeah, please like, share, subscribe, comment, do all of those good things, and I'll see you when I make my next video. Take care.